In the final quiet weeks of his life, Ozzy Osbourne said something to Sharon that no one expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wild, and it wasn't the voice of the Prince of Darkness. It was a whisper, a simple final wish that carried decades of love, pain, and memories. And today, we walk through those weeks slowly, carefully, and truthfully, even if it feels painfully boring, to understand why those last words broke the world. There are stories in rock history that explode with noise, drama, and chaos. And then there are stories that unfold almost silently. Stories that feel heavy not because of excitement, but because of the quiet weight they carry. The final weeks of Ozzy Osbourne's life belong to the second category. They are not dramatic, they are not loud, and frankly, they are not even fast. They are long, slow, and emotionally tiring, but they must be told carefully, step by step. This is the story of how, in those final weeks, Ozzy Osbourne shared his last wish with a woman he spent his entire life fighting with, loving, hurting, supporting, and trusting, Sharon Osbourne. A wish that was soft, simple, and yet unbelievably heartbreaking. To understand that wish, we must walk through the final days of Ozzy's life, beginning long before he ever whispered those words. Section 1. A slow decline. Ozzy Osbourne's final weeks were not sudden. They were the end of a long, slow decline that stretched over years. A decline marked by surgeries, infections, nerve issues, and a body that simply could no longer keep up with the spirit trapped inside it. The painful part is this: Ozzy's mind never truly wanted to stop. Even in the final year, even in the final month, he still talked about making music, still dreamed of performing again, still imagined himself stepping onto a stage with a microphone in hand. But the body does not listen to dreams forever. Doctors were honest, painfully honest with him. But Ozzy was known for ignoring limits. It was something he had been doing since the 1970s. But during those final weeks, even he couldn't pretend anymore. His breathing was slower. His speech was softer. His steps were shorter. Everything about him had become quieter. It was during these slow, dragging days that Ozzy began talking more seriously to Sharon, about life, about regrets, about memories, and eventually, about what he wanted when everything was finally over. Section 2. Sharon's constant presence. Sharon Osbourne had seen Ozzy through more crises than anyone else. She was there for the addictions, the relapses, the scandals, the fights, the tour, the victories, the breakdowns, and the rebuilding. Through sickness and success, she had stood by his side with a resilience that few people could understand. In these last weeks, her role became almost entirely one thing: caretaker. She wasn't Sharon the manager, not Sharon the TV personality, not Sharon the outspoken talk show host.
She was simply Sharon, the woman who sat beside her husband's bed, held his hand, adjusted his blanket, watched him sleep, and listened to every word he whispered. She didn't complain. She didn't cry in front of him. She didn't show fear, but she felt everything. And she understood something before Ozzy even said it. This was the end. Not because the doctors said so, but because Ozzy's body said so. And this silent understanding is what led to the moment when Ozzy, with a voice weaker than ever before, began to express things he had never said out loud. Section 3. Memories that returned slowly. One thing everyone around Ozzy noticed in his final weeks was how often he returned to old memories. Not the wild ones, not the insane ones, but the quiet ones, moments that didn't belong in documentaries or interviews, but in personal memory boxes. He talked about the early days with Sharon. He talked about the children. He talked about mistakes, and he talked about love. He talked about tours, the fans, and how he never believed he would become a legend. He talked about his father. He talked about home. and he talked about what mattered most. This slow process, almost like turning the pages of a heavy book, prepared him for the words he would eventually share. Section 4: Physical Limitations. By the time these final weeks arrived, Ozzy's physical condition was severely limited. He couldn't walk without help. He couldn't stand for long. He couldn't breathe comfortably without support. He couldn't eat the way he used to. And he definitely couldn't perform again. The doctors did their best. The nurses were gentle. Sharon was strong. But the truth was painfully clear. Time was shrinking. Ozzy wasn't afraid of dying. He had said many times in life that he had made peace with death. What he feared was leaving things unsaid. Unfinished conversations. Unspoken truths. Unexpressed feelings. And that fear is what led to the final wish. Section 5: The Slow Realization. On afternoon. During these final weeks, Ozzy seemed quieter than usual. Sharon was sitting near him, reading something but not really paying attention to the words. She kept glancing at him, noticing the way his breathing changed, the way his eyes opened and closed like they were carrying a lifetime of exhaustion. And then he spoke. Not loudly, not clearly, but softly, in a tone that Sharon instantly recognized as important. He said her name, just her name. And when she moved closer, he told her something he had been holding inside for years. Something he had never said so directly. Something that was part love, part regret, part gratitude. And then he expressed his final wish. But before we reveal that wish, we must understand everything that emotionally built up to it, step by slow step. That is why the story continues deeper. Section 6: Why this wish mattered for Ozzy. Wishes were never simple. Through his entire life, he had lived chaotically, impulsively, often recklessly.
He wished for fame, then regretted it. He wished for silence, then missed the noise. He wished for peace, then destroyed it. He wished for love, then struggled to maintain it. But this last wish was different. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about music. It wasn't about legacy. It was about something far more personal, something deeply connected to Sharon, something connected to how he wanted to be remembered, not by fans or the world, but by the woman who stood with him until his final breath. This wish is the emotional center of the story, and it becomes clearer as the final hours approach. Section 7: The Quiet Nights. Nights were the hardest for Sharon. Ozzy often struggled with discomfort, restlessness, and interrupted sleep. The nights felt long, heavy, and endlessly slow. Sometimes he would wake up suddenly, whispering things from old memories. Sometimes he would talk about music, as if he were dreaming about the stage. But on a few nights, he talked about death, not fearfully, not dramatically, just quietly, as though he had already accepted it. He told Sharon that he didn't want pain, he didn't want machines, he didn't want noise, he wanted peace. It was one of these nights when he said something that would lead to the heartbreaking final wish. Section 8: The Family's Preparation. The children visited as often as they could. Their presence made Ozzy smile. Even on the days when his body barely allowed it, they talked about memories. They held his hands. They made him laugh gently. But they also understood. This was goodbye. The family didn't talk about it directly, but the air carried it. The house carried it. Even the silence carried it. Ozzy would sometimes look at each child and whisper small pieces of advice. Nothing dramatic, nothing long, just short, simple words. The kind of thing a father says when he knows the moments are few. But Sharon, she received something deeper, something heavier, something that came from a lifetime of being his anchor. And it is this slow buildup that leads to the exact moment of the final wish. Section 9: The moment approaches. In the final days, Ozzy became even quieter. The decline was steady, calm, and unavoidable. Sharon spent nearly every hour beside him. She didn't leave the room unless she had to. She didn't want to miss anything, especially not his final words. One morning, after hours of silence, Ozzy suddenly looked at her with clarity. A clarity she hadn't seen in days. A clarity that felt almost supernatural. And with that clarity, he prepared to share the wish he had been holding inside for years. His voice was quiet, His eyes were tired, his breathing was slow, but his words were unforgettable. At this moment, just weeks before his death, Ozzy Osbourne told Sharon the one thing he wanted more than anything else.